All right. We're here once again for our perpetual first show of Jazz Cabbage Cafe. One of these times we'll bust out into all the stuff that we talked about doing. It just takes a little while to get there, but it's getting there.
Yes. Welcome. Thanks for coming back and listening to us once again for our first show. It's awesome of you.
We'll get through some read-throughs of our sponsors and why they're so cool and our appreciation for them today. We'll talk about a lot of the current events that have been going on affecting this community in Michigan and what we can expect here the next few months. Rick Thompson should be joining us via calling in.
Yeah, he just tried to call a second ago, and we lost him, so hopefully he does give us another call back here in a second.
Eventually we'll get him.
Oh, here he is. He is calling in, so I'm going to welcome Rick right now.
Rick, are you
all
there?
Right, Rick, how you doing, brother? Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Am I coming through okay?
Yes, it is.
I think you're coming through a little bit too loudly, and the tone is not really pleasant.
Yeah.
And Evelyn is joining us today too for at least the little first part of the broadcast. She's hoping we get to an early commercial so she can get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Oh, I missed it. Oh no, that makes me sad. Evelyn's there.
Yeah, she said she was looking for Rick Thompson.
With the big fatties.
Yep.
They all say that. Right up until the point
They
where
all
it comes
say
to
that.
actually prove it. That's what they all say.
Hey, Rick, I know you already know this, but I brought you a donut. I brought you a coffee. I thought I saw your car outside. I ran down the street to the
There's a
donut
car
store.
identical to yours in the parking lot out here. I thought you were just here
Grabbing
grabbing some $1 tacos or something like that.
People always miss school when it's somebody's birthday and there's free cupcakes.
Well, if you're familiar with Rick and Morty, you'll know that there's an infinite number of Ricks, and perhaps one of them from an alternate universe has come in my automobile.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're gonna leave this donut here for you till next week.
Oh, it'll be nice and hard and
No, it looks like it's got
worthy
some
of throwing
stamina.
Jamie's head.
So these
Yeah,
are
right.
What are these? Apple crisps? What are they called?
Apple fritters.
Apple fritter donuts. And Jamie's grandmother used to hand make these in Jamaica.
Yeah.
When he was an
She used
infant.
to at least buy some and then hand them to me when I was younger, and I kind of remember that.
So the apple
Very
fritter is
nice.
the donut theme of the show.
Yeah, very special.
That's not exactly the same as hand making them, but yes, I dig it. Sure.
A little slightly more dramatic, but it's an intense, fond memory for me.
So Rick, I'm
She
glad you
could
called.
have.
This is bringing up. She did do stuff like that, but I just don't recall specifically. That's all. It's not really part of my story. It's part of Derek's interpretation of my story.
We all got a way of introducing each other. So Rick, how was your week?
Busy. I attended a couple of different meetings this last week, including a meeting at Thetford Township last night, where the community elected to opt in to the MMFLA. They did not actually pass ordinances containing all the language that would be required for an applicant, but what they did was send a positive signal to all prospective business owners that they are going to proceed forward with this, and if a suitable ordinance is passed or can be drafted, rather, that they would do that. I know that there have been discussions in the past about people that have actually already procured land in that community, so this will make them feel a little bit more secure about their decision to purchase real estate. And also, Thetford Township's home of the Green Triangle.
And yeah,
So
this is
that
a place
has probably-
this is a place that's been tolerant / friendly toward cannabis activity for a while now in Genesee County, a little north of Flint. Longtime activist is a local elected official there.
So I did a couple of other things too. I went to the brand new motion picture premiere of the film Flint, which is
Ooh.
about the Flint water crisis. We should probably talk a little bit more about that as a later portion of the show, since we have a couple hours to go. Then also I went to a fundraiser for a gentleman named Scott Kincaid, who is running for mayor of Flint. And as it turns out, I think there are 14 or 15 candidates running for that position, because Mayor Weaver was recalled successfully through the petition process, and therefore has to re-earn her seat. And during this option, we have a ton of candidates. And then, as Jamie is very familiar with, November 7th will be a wonderful vote in the city of Detroit for a pair of ordinances. We could talk some more about that also later on, too. So I know Jamie attended a couple of things this week as well.
I did. I attended the kickoff for Jeff Irwin's senatorial bid in his campaign to take over for Rebecca Warren in the district, mainly the eastern half of Washtenaw County. Essentially, is the area for that senatorial district, and he would be my senator. And I was there, and I supported him and made a contribution, and talked to a lot of other people who were there, and I really hope that he ends up being our next senator. And I also attended a fundraiser for MILegalize put on by Matt Abel and Tom Levine from Cannabis Council. And they had, and Nick Zattel had a lot to do with it. Sam Pernick was there and putting on a great show for everybody. They had Billy Davis, who's legendary to some in the music world. He worked with Jimi Hendrix early on, considered to be one of Jimi Hendrix's mentors, which is pretty cool. He did a couple tunes with John Sinclair, which is always nice for a lot of us. We raised a few bucks, but the talk there was really positive or homing in on the signatures needed to make it to ballot. 95% plus kind of numbers were discussed. So we're really right there. We just got a little bit to go. If we pour it in a little bit just the next few days.
Heck yeah.
That'll be it. So, but that was a great and discussed with some people who have been doing this for a long time at that event too, including John Sinclair. There are people who have put in decades trying to get something very reasonable. Of course, the medical passage in 2008 was a great victory, and a lot of activity got started over that. And you know, we're all here in part as a result of that. But this will really be a move forward, and this will be very significant. Michigan stamped a legalized state, along with the few that have gotten started. And I'm really happy for those people who have been around waiting for this for so long.
It's incredible. It's incredible. Rick, you still there with us? No,
Oh, yeah.
I hear you. I hear you.
He's in awe.
Yeah, so I saw you were, Jamie was rolling up doobies with John Sinclair. I was pretty jealous about that. Well, mainly because I like doobies so much. It was cool. Saw it on your Facebook post.
Yes.
Wish I was there for that.
Yes, I think
invite me for any
both
cool
John
stuff.
Sinclair and I are trying to slide under the radar a little bit on the Cannabis Association.
Oh,
Right.
You didn't want me to mention that
There's a
on
big
Live
mystery
Air?
about this.
To our millions of listeners.
Yeah,
By the way,
John's
thank you.
embarrassed. He quietly supports.
No, I think Jamie and I have been very fortunate to be able to share medication with John Sinclair on a number of different occasions in a bunch of different situations, including some where John, who's, you know, up in years there, occasionally will fall asleep while you're there.
Nice.
He needs to take
And
little power naps from time to time.
Yeah, me too.
He likes to do some.
We had an event in Ann Arbor in his honor where John slept through most of the event. Isn't that true, Jamie?
I think he had a couple of edibles early on and got a lot of the excitement out earlier in the day.
Yep.
But that was a very cool event, though. I've had a great time.
It was fun. We had a big outdoor tent with some really awesome musicians came to play. Jamie knows who they are.
Oh yeah.
Well, who are they? I don't know who they were.
Don was
Oh,
there.
there you go.
Robert Whittle Jr. helped to put it on. He's a member of the Chicago Blues Hall of Fame, and he had a lot of great connections and brought in some very well-noted people, friends of John, supporters. I don't necessarily want to say everybody who was there. Some people might not necessarily be that open about their support and stuff like that, but a lot of very notable people were there.
Lath was there, wasn't he?
Of course, Lath Al-Sadi, yep, was there. Yep, it was a very good night, and the whole thing was to
We have Maruga. Maruga was there also. And
Maruga Booker and Ray Reyes were jamming a little bit too. Yep.
Nice.
And of course, they've helped us out with this campaign quite a bit. And John has shown up, and in fact, I believe today we will have a little clippage of Maruga, Razor Ray, some other people, great musicians, and John Sinclair doing their thing for a few minutes. Have a selected nice little cut from a night at Ohm just a few weeks ago when we were doing a meetup for the Ann Arbor IPSI volunteers for the MILegalize CRMLA campaign.
Nice.
So look forward to that. And John wants to come on the show. It just hasn't been working out between other appointments and engagements, and his ability to do stuff, as Rick said, he's getting a little bit older, so he's a little bit more selective
Yeah.
with his time, but he does want to come on, and that will come together.
Well, maybe he can be on our first show.
When we finally have maybe the second or third show thing, and let's get this down first before we have somebody on of his stature.
Hey, I wanted to talk about just because we were talking about all these rock bands and stuff. I wanted to talk about the connection that I believe is there between creativity and cannabis. I just think this is a very real thing. As a photographer and videographer myself, I know that like when I sit down to do my editing, it always helps in a sense to be a little stoned. I don't know. How do you guys feel about that?
It helps me to do a lot of
talk
things.
about the science on this. I wrote about this for High Times Magazine.
There you go. Well, then you're the man to ask.
Right,
As
so,
on many topics.
Yep, we know that cannabis and THC specifically affects neurotransmitters. What neurotransmitters do is they enable cells to talk to each other. So when you affect neurotransmitters, you either make that communication easier or worse. THC makes the communication easier. Now, what that means is that the threshold at which different cells communicate with each other is lowered. So it takes less stimuli to start a signal. So you may think of ice cream, and as you're on your way to the ice cream store, all of a sudden dog food pops in your mind, and then all of a sudden you remember your third grade showing of the movie Beethoven and that giant dog and all that slobber, and God, I don't want ice cream anymore because now that's gross. So your thoughts jump quickly from place to place because it doesn't take as much to make your thoughts jump like that as it normally would because the THC has moderated your neurotransmitters. So in a creative sense, that allows you to think about one thing, but then yet be inspired by something else, which may in your mind be related, which takes you in directions you would never have considered. Whether you're artist in the physical sense with pottery or with painting, or with you're an artist from a verbal perspective with poetry or with lyrics, or whether you do photography, which allows you to look at a scene from a completely different angle and then shoot something that's totally awesome that you never even considered, even though you walked by that thing 20 times already. So that's exactly the science of how cannabis can affect creativity. It also sometimes means it's difficult for you to stay on track with the original thought process. So it may enhance creativity, but may also destroy productivity, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. Oh. Sorry, I muted my microphone. That makes perfect sense to me. I mean, I can see it. I can feel it when I'm doing it. I'm sure other people can too. Like, it's more like when you're doing a tedious task, it like almost becomes more manageable to achieve and like getting through something, meticulous, like with a repetitive, something that has to do that's really repetitive. I mean, like being stoned, obviously going to make that easier too. It's just, and and one of the other big factors to it for me is always being able to like have that minute or so to yourself when you're in the middle of doing something or creating something big, to just take another step away from it and have a reason, so it being a break in itself and all the science that you explained. I mean, damn. So it's actually a true thing?
I like doing most things, after consuming cannabis for focus and relaxation.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, of course, the relaxation, right? Dang.
And it sometimes does have an effect on productivity, but it's quality, not quantity.
Speaking of relaxation, it's almost... What were you going to say, Rick? I don't want to cut you off. I was just going to...
Let me just do this. THC doesn't affect us all the same, but not all THC is created equal because it also comes with the associated additional cannabinoids, those things that we sometimes call the ensemble effect, right? So when THC modulates your neurotransmitters, other chemicals that you're inhaling also have additional modification effects too. That's why sometimes you can smoke certain cannabis and it will allow you to focus more because the THC in conjunction with the other chemicals there allow that to be the focus of how it affects your neurotransmitters. So there's some couch lock, you know what I'm talking about, where you don't even want to move. When you have a high CBD content or when you're talking about an indica, it's about the entire plant, the whole plant medicine, and that's why we have this wondrous variety of our plants. It's why you can't synthesize one particular aspect of the cannabis plant and think that you successfully reproduced the experience or that you successfully reproduced the medicine. So take that, Sativex.
That's right.
In your face, GW.
Some people are pretty sensitive, and they have to figure out which things line up with them and works for their situation, and others can utilize a lot of the different variations of the thing.
What would be the best way to find out?
You have to
Experimentation.
you got to dig in and
until
just
we
get
have
going on every possible way all the time.
I think that's a good idea. And you know what?
That's what I do.
I think right now, more than any other time, it'd be pretty much perfect for us to do a little experimenting ourselves. What do you think, Rick? It's looking like 4:16 on our clocks. What is it out there in Flint?
Yeah, it's cold and windy and rainy, and that's one of the reasons I'm not in the studio today.
A little bit behind.
It's not good temperature for weather for a guy like me. So,
all right, so we're going to take a break here for this 420. I hope our listeners are going to enjoy it. As always, right now we're playing music. In these weeks following, we do got a comedy guest who's going to be joining us. What's his name again? Adam Berg. He's a good guy. He was with us last week. He told some really funny jokes. And just around 4:20 every week, he's going to be joining us. So, again, this is Jazz Cabbage Cafe. We're here every single Tuesday from 4 to 6. And one of the reasons we pick that time is so we can enjoy 420. And we think you should do the same thing. Here we go. All right. We're back. You hear me good, Jamie?
Yeah, it was just kind of loud.
Oh, nice.
Rick making unnecessary background noise.
Rick.
Because he can.
It's okay. So we're back.
Not making unnecessary background noise at all necessary.
He likes to be heard and be felt even when he's not necessarily contributing anything.
It's okay.
That's right. Yeah. You know what I want? I want to hear more about Jamie's black grandma with the dreadlocks who used to make donuts out of sand and fish paste in Jamaica.
See, I knew that was interesting.
Dreadlocks Granny.
So, Rick, I was just talking on the break. I love throwing these random topics your way. I was so happy that you grabbed the last creativity and cannabis topic and just ran with it like a mad
There are many
scientist.
things that Rick can't talk about. He's got no ability to even creatively engage in a discussion.
What is that?
So you've just been lucky that you've come up with a couple of things that he's able to discuss.
We need to have a segment on the show called Stump Rick.
Rick's
wow.
what?
That's a thought.
Rick's
Rick's
that's
stump.
not a name I normally go by. But,
What were you saying, Rick? I'm sorry. We were talking about your stump.
I would think Stump Rick is not a name I would normally go by. It's not a very flattering descriptor. So
No, a segment. So people call in, they have a cannabis question
Just a segment of it.
that may or may not stump you. They get 5 minutes to call in and talk about something interesting. Stumps.
Yeah, that's not too bad. Yeah, I understand the concept. I was making a dick joke.
We're gonna dare people to insert something interesting into the
miss out
show.
on everything.
Stump Rick would just be the bad thing, So, but
Rick's stump.
If Stump is only a segment of the full Rick, then that's fine.
Rick's stump segment.
So in case you had no idea whatsoever, this show is about cannabis and cannabis law reform, right? We want to
sometimes Rick's stump,
and at times Rick's stump.
Well, everybody talks about it. Why not?
But as always, at 5 o'clock, Rick is going to inform us of the most recent news going on here in Michigan.
and elsewhere.
And
around the world.
Is normal. I never know what's coming for Rick's 5 o'clock segment, but it's always worth listening to. That's what I know.
So we're gonna hear from
That's
that later
a lot
on.
to live up to.
Well, it's good. It's been good for years, of course, originating on Planet Green Trees.
Yeah.
With Camorn, and now its perfected version being presented on Jazz Cabbage Cafe. But in between, we'll also be hearing from Sam Pernick, who's the head of the Young Democrats in Michigan, and he also works with us at the MILegalize organization. And he will call and weigh in on what he thinks is going on in this political climate in terms of some candidates and the campaign itself. And he's a very interesting young guy with a lot of good ideas, and he's done a great job for our campaign so far, so we'll be interested in hearing from him a little bit. And then maybe, schedule permitting, we'll get Justin from Spot Labs to call in. He's been wanting to call in and talk a little bit about testing of infused products and the Sativa v. Indica discussion.
Nice.
So hopefully that stuff will actually unfold. And we're also going to read our sponsors' pieces here today.
Yes, stick around. We have commercials.
Yep.
And music. We always play some good music, mostly cannabis themed. I think we need to go outside.
We take a different approach here. It's kind of boring and drab in between, but then the commercials are definitely worth listening to.
Yeah. Sweet. So we do have other interesting things to talk about. We have our local events that are coming up, so stick around for that. And also, Jamie always finishes off the show. Jamie and Rick actually always finish off the show with telling us some good calls to action, some things that you can do.
And I have unlocked the secret of elevated yoga, by the way.
That's good. We're done talking about elevated yoga because nobody's going to elevated yoga.
Oh, yeah,
as
they
you
are.
should be.
Oh, yeah, they are. Oh, yes, they are. It's elevated, but it's kind of secret. It's kind of surreptitious.
Nice.
Well, you know what? The yoga classes are, of course, very, very popular all over the place. So it only makes sense that people who are already in touch with their body would be using cannabis to enhance that.
So
it's a natural marriage to me.
No question. I met one of the instructors. Happened to already know the person. Did not know that she was an instructor of yoga or of this type of yoga, which combines cannabis and yoga. And I just mentioned in conversation that I've been practicing yin lately, which focuses on stretching ligaments and things like that, and some meditative properties and breathing and holding postures for long periods of time. And she told me that she teaches a class called Yindica.
Ooh.
And so I said I will be there, and I will be there.
Nice.
And then I'll come back here and let you know how it was when I was there.
Indica. So is it only indica allowed?
I don't think necessarily. I think it's just kind of a clever name.
Okay,
and,
nice.
I'm just assuming you can use whatever you choose, whatever works for you.
I don't know what I like better because I don't know. We talked about this last week.
I think
Indica
we'll talk about it
dumb.
again, maybe with Justin from Spot Labs, who has an opinion on that very thing.
Well, if he says it makes sense, I'm going to say that's dumb.
We'll hear what he has to say first before you say anything to him.
Well, I can at least ask the guy the question, like, why am I presented with only the options of indica and sativa at 90% of the dispensaries I go to? Like, what do you like?
Or hybrid, of course, is the other one that you'll hear, or dominant of either one.
Well, I always say hybrid because it's like I can't decide. So,
they
middle there.
And they all are hybrid anyway, most likely. So,
Yeah. You know, we talk about a lot of things. Jamie and I have both been judges for High Times Cannabis Cup, and we've done it across multiple different classifications and categories. And the hybrid classification typically has far more samples than either sativa or indica, because I think the market really is hybrid dictated. I mean, wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, but that might just be majority because the reason people can't decide. Right?
Well, I think people for years have been combining qualities of these plants that they like a lot and trying to come up with kind of like a new thing that is all encompassing, and these different variations on the theme, and some really cool things have resulted from that. More things for people to try.
Sweet.
In various forms.
Wasn't that long ago that people didn't care about sativa and indica? All they cared about was, you know, whatever the guy had that pulled up in their driveway and honked his horn. So,
hey, no shit.
You know, it's the ability for us to choose sativa, hybrid, indica is a beautiful product of the medical program. I mean, it's just a great thing.
The variety is definitely a great thing. Remember in Grandma's Boy, which is now kind of an old movie, there's a purchase taking place down in the basement, and there are several different kinds there, and the purchaser says, "I just want a bag of weed." Totally confused by the fact that there are choices at that point, and I kind of remember that transition taking place in Michigan.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a lot to take in. If you've only thought of cannabis as as one thing, and now all of a sudden it's scientific, and you have to think about terpenes and flavonoids and ensemble chemicals. So a lot of people just default to whatever smells good, whatever looks good, regardless of what they're told by their favorite bud tender that it is.
You know what I will right, and there's something to be said for that too, because I did notice when I used to work with patients quite a bit at Third Coast for a long time, and got to see people over and over again and get their response on different things that they were trying. And when the time comes when you can look deeper into the plant, and when Justin calls in, he'll talk about what he sees in the future for that kind of testing. But when you can see more than the THC percentage and some of the cannabinoid percentages, and more into like some of the main components that are in there, I think people have an easier time choosing their product. matching themselves up with something that they feel pretty comfortable with that'll work for them.
Yeah.
I think that once we have more information, people become a lot more knowledgeable about the cannabis. You can tell someone that it contains limonene, but if they don't connect that to a specific bodily effect, then it oftentimes is just information without purpose. So when we do a good job of identifying what's in it, and then we know what works for us, it's a lot easier for us to gravitate towards things that have the common components. So instead of worrying about the name, being hung up on something because it's a Cush or it's a Haze strain or an OG strain, people will perhaps gravitate towards things that contain myrcene or some of the other chemicals that are non-psychoactive, what significantly contribute to the medicinal effect.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think when I was speaking with some of the guys from ACT Labs early on, when I was doing some work with that group, they were talking about creating a system in which, based on what the major components are in the testing, would result in the name. So when you got used to that system, when you just heard the name of what was tested, you'd have a good idea of what its high points are and what its major components are. That never came to fruition yet, but at some point, something like that would be a good idea.
There's a lot of information on the internet now about strains and their heredity. We see you can go online to a certain website and find out exactly what Blue Dream, what was it crossed with, and how long ago, and from which company, and what's the phenotype. All of those different things are available. Once we get an accurate depiction of what it means to be Blue Dream, what a chemical composition of proper Blue Dream is, then we can stop just guessing as to whether or not it's actually Blue Dream. I know that in the industry, that has been the case in the past, that in some isolated times, people have changed the names of cannabis to make them more saleable. There's a lot of very weird names of cannabis out there, and some of them are they don't reflect at all what it actually does for you. It's just kind of a gimmick. So once we start looking at cannabis from a compositional standpoint as opposed to a public relations standpoint, man, I believe we're really talking about maximizing the medicinal benefit out of it. And some of the things that we see now with seizure control and appetite suppression, those will just be enhanced. This cannabis plant gets better and better and better when we study the whole plant medicine.
Hey, so do you remember
no feeling.
Do you remember when we were at Dab Wars one night and a guy named Kay came in preparation, I think, for one of the High Times Cup a couple of years ago?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And his work in the cannabis field has been to get really deep into the plant, and he talks to the hundreds of things that are in there. And we know that there are things there, but we don't know what they are and how important they are in the whole synergistic mix of things, or what they may do, and how they might contribute by themselves or with all the other components, is something that's been of interest to him for a while. But he has a vision where you have all of these things isolated at some point, all the various components that you come across that make up the various types of cannabis plants. And somebody, for example, may want a certain customized mixture, or they want something that, in particular, Maui Wowie or something like that. You hit the button, and all the relative exact amounts of each of the hundreds of things come together, and you have a reproduction of Maui Wowie. That was his vision. Something like that would be quite cool and seems plausible in the future.
That'd be awesome. Obviously, I mean.
Well, we talked about, early in the game, Jamie, there was a discussion about compounding centers and what compounding would look like, and it's a very attractive idea. The thought being that if you knew that somebody needed some cannabis that made them tired and also gave them some muscle relief, but maybe also inspired their appetite because of whatever illness they had, you could take 3 cannabis sources, mix them together, and then create a bunch of pre-rolls for that particular person that would have those 3 particular traits. And that's a great way to be able to refine it and fine-tune your medicinal application. I don't know how long it's going to take before we can get there, and if we can stave off the pharmaceutical desire to put everything into a pill form, long enough for us to be able to realize the full potential.
It's what Ken Byer was talking about early on when he had his sniffer machine, which was really cool way to test. It wasn't complete in the information that it could offer, so it couldn't be used as reliable for the composition of things, but it could see what was inside there. And the idea of like the old school kind of compounding, where people have the amounts and different components of things that they figure out works for them in their conditions, instead of just a mass-produced sterile amount of milligrams, or that's how it's kind of turned into.
Right.
That was kind of the idea, the same thing, and it still is a good idea.
Well, yeah.
We'll get there at some point.
Explain the sniffer so that people know what that was.
Well, it's technology that is used quite a bit. It gets used in certain ways when you go to the airport and you're standing in that circle thing, and it zips around you. People have used it, military, to detect whether or not there's like chemical warfare stuff in the air, and it's a way to get chemical compositions when it has to know what it's looking for. But there's like the same guy who invented the flat screen TV, and this particular crystal that resulted in that ability vibrates in a particular way. I'm not the expert on it, so don't. Well, try to basically say so. It vibrates in a particular way, so when something comes through it, it has a particular pattern. If you know what you're looking for and the patterns match up, then you confirm that this stuff was there, this thing was there. And Ken had this set out for many terpenes, and so we couldn't determine the exact composition in the plant, but we could see that they were there.
That's amazing. But
now I think some of the better technology or more advanced versions of that technology now can do the complete thing, and it does get used in some capacity.
It's in the.
Well, we know that. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Rick. I was just going to say it's in the movie Richie Rich. They identify a bomb with the smell detector. It's the same thing, right?
Oh, really?
I'm sure it's exactly the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, we use the same thing too. Our noses. The nose is the most sensitive sensory organ that we have. So your olfactory senses. When we stick our nose into a great big bag of cannabis and it makes us all excited, we're doing exactly the same thing, except that machine could detect on a much different level.
And I was starting to talk about that before, and I got off track. And I was going to say, when I used to be engaged with working with lots of patients, oftentimes I notice when somebody really likes something, when it smelled really good to them, it oftentimes was a good medicine for them to use. They were picking up on something that their system was saying we could use some of this stuff.
Natural instincts.
And so I believe.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so let's accept the fact that our nose has taken a lot more information than our conscious brains really let us have access to. So if during the consumption process of cannabis, your nose is detecting a certain pattern of odors, and you have a good experience, and the next time that pattern of odors comes around, even though, like a dog whistle, humans, there's a certain sonic level that we reach with our conscious perception, but our equipment still hears it, even though we don't hear it. It makes sense, though, Jamie, what you're saying, that the body would know and the body would respond to something it had a good experience with before.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it is for me. I mean, I always relate everything I do with my nose. Hey, let me put this conversation on hold and accept this caller. Okay, let's see who it is.
It might just be Sam.
Hello, welcome to the Jazz Cabbage Cafe. Who we got?
This is Sam Pernick.
Yeah.
How you doing, Sam?
Mentioned you earlier, Sam, hoping that you would call in about now, and you
Doing
did.
well. How's it going?
I'm doing great over here. My name's Derek, and of course you know Jamie. So everybody, this is Sam.
And Rick Thompson's on the phone with us too, and Sam's works with us at MILegalize. He's also head of the Young Democrats in Michigan.
What is the Young Democrats?
They are Democrats, but they're not very old.
Nice. So you're a Democrat who is not old.
That's right. Yeah, we're a caucus of the Michigan Democratic Party, so kind of the main rabble rousers right now in the party. We've been pretty critical of the party's current leadership, a lot of what they've been doing. So,
And that criticism seems to make sense because the lack of performance by the party over the last few years, even with some really great opportunities. And so some fresh blood and some fresh perspective is definitely needed. I think you posted something recently, if I'm not mistaken, about how like a lot of the major pushes for change and rallies and really traditional ways of trying to get some movement going on some issues haven't had the Democrats behind them. It's been other groups and organizations, other kind of progressive type thinkers that have filled that role.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of unbelievable. With the election of Donald Trump, you would think that this would be a great opportunity for the Democratic Party to bring in a lot of new members. But what we've seen happen is a lot of people have just chosen not to be involved with the party. They're involved with a lot of these other groups, Indivisible, Michigan for Revolution, a lot of the other kind of progressive grassroots issues and causes that kind of popped up. They're a lot more receptive and open, and that they aren't kind of run like a good old boys network that's been around for the last 50 years, which is kind of how the party in Michigan has been run, and we've seen the consequences. Trump was elected, and Democrats can't seem to win anything in Michigan. Won a couple of seats, but for the most part, the record of the last 7 years has been pretty bad.
Yeah. Hopefully it's time for the pendulum swing, but a lot of people are scared that Schuette's going to step right in and take over. I'll admit, I don't take a party affiliation, and I think a lot of people are doing that not just because of lack of performance of the Democrats or anything else, just out of being fed up of the current system and its lack of functionality and wanting to look at things differently and trying to banding together on certain issues and trying to make that happen. And so I'm sure it kind of all goes hand in hand. I recently formally joined the Democrat Party for the sole purpose of showing up at the convention and voting for Dana Nessel for Attorney General. When that's over, I'll return to being a free agent. But that is important to me, and I think you and I agree that Dana Nessel is great for us, and as does Rick. And who else is out there? Who's running for governor? And I think that ties into an MILegalize event that we have coming up. If you don't mind letting people know about that and kind of discussing how you're seeing these campaigns and these major things play out as it comes into as it relates to our legalization campaign as well, coming together in 2018.
Sure. So the kind of what you mentioned before is that Dana Nessel is running for Attorney General. She's running against a guy named Patrick Miles, who is a former prosecutor federal prosecutor from the west side of the state, who was extremely aggressive in prosecuting people for medical marijuana. And he's one of the main people that a lot of the folks within the Democratic Party leadership are pushing. He doesn't even support medical marijuana. He stated that in or he wouldn't come out in support of it. He
off the record, yeah.
In that off the record interview that he did, which was pretty concerning. And so that there isn't a primary for the AG's race. Mostly, in most cases, you have a primary in August, like for the gubernatorial race and for the Senate race and for president. Everybody goes on and votes if you're registered to vote. But the Attorney General race and some of these other races they operate differently, where you have to be a member of the party in order to nominate these candidates. And there's an official nominating convention that's happening in August of 18, but in April there'll be an endorsement convention, basically just to give candidates kind of the imprimatur of the party, so they have a little bit more time to campaign with that and raise money. But Miles is really concerning. He's picked up a decent amount of kind of traditional the party leadership support, and we've been trying to get the word out about his record, which I think is pretty troubling. And Dana is obviously great on when it comes to MILegalize and the issues that we're really pushing. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Well, I want to interject. I want to interject a couple things real quick and let you go on about the candidates in your thing there. One is issue I have with Patrick Miles, head of the federal prosecutors of the Western District. I believe has some kind of discretion, and when faced with whether or not to prosecute these people, they were known as the Okemos 7 or Lansing 7. Shortly after the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act went into effect, this group decided to utilize a lot of property that one of them had around the Lansing area, and to work with some people who have some knowledge and some ability to utilize that space to facilitate the new law, the new medical marijuana program in the state. They spoke with local officials and law enforcement, and what they were doing clearly under state law, formed proper companies, and they decided, and there was a federal investigation by DEA. They decided to prosecute, even though they were following state law. The judge and the lawyers at sentencing, talked about how sensational that was and how Schuette should have been much better in defining things and all this kind of stuff. Regardless, I think that there was some ability there to utilize the fact that these people were following state law to have to really follow through with the prosecution, or at least to the extent that they were prosecuted. And I don't know how he talks his way out of that one for me. I mean, I'd like to hear what his answer is.
Well, and on top of that, there was also a memo from the Justice Department, from Eric Holder, that discouraged prosecutors from going after these cases. And he still did it. So, I mean, there was a huge rise in hate crimes in Michigan during his tenure as a federal prosecutor. He did almost nothing about it, but spent a lot of time and a lot of resources at that office prosecuting people for medical marijuana. And then he talks about how he opposes mass incarceration. When he opposes the war on drugs, well, he's part of the war on drugs.
That's unfortunate. That's difficult for me to get past. I have to admit that's one of the reasons I'm really going to push hard to be there for Dana. I'm also hearing that former Senator Steve Beda may join the race. Have you heard that one?
I've heard that, but we'll have to see if that actually ends up materializing, because Steve Beda he's a state senator from Macomb, and he's expressed interest in running for Sandra Levin's seat, who represents the 9th District. I'm in Sandra Levin's district. And Levin's been talking about retiring, and there have been rumors that he's going to retire this year. So it's possible that, what I've heard is that Steve's been kind of floating his name for AG, but really wants to run for that congressional seat. And Sandy Levin, another friend, someone else who is no friend to the cannabis community. I don't even know if he's come on record in support of medical cannabis, but he certainly doesn't support legalization. I don't know where Beda stands on the issue, but I haven't seen him speaking out on it. That's for sure. So.
Well, he's not that bad on it, from what I can recall. Rick, we've been in some committee hearings and things like that. He's been part of the minority on those committees and stuff, but he has been at least probably the more reasonable voice consistently. Rick, you still with us?
Rick, you there? Oops. Oh, he's still here. The clock is still ticking. He might.
He's just still in awe right now.
Hey, Rick, you there?
I've met Steve a number of times. I mean, Steve is a really good guy. I think that I don't think that he would be as strong an advocate for the cannabis community as Dana.
No, Dana,
but,
he
certainly no Patrick Miles.
Dana clearly articulates why she is in support, and she gets into not only her understanding of how how the substance really works for people in their conditions, and increases quality of life and that kind of thing. But her perspective as a criminal defense attorney, and how these small marijuana cases clog up the court systems, and how absurd it is to have to go fight on behalf of these people, and they really risk losing liberty and lots of money and getting criminal records and things like that just over pot. She's kind of appalled by that. She describes that really well, and she definitely has said the right things to me. She also takes a particular view on many other issues that I happen to agree with. This is my most important issue, though, and that's why I actually joined the party, to show up at the convention. And people can do that. It has to be 30 days before a certain date in April, I believe. You know more about that, Sam.
Yeah, so the date is April 15th. So the way it works is that if you sign up with the MDP 30 days in advance, if you get your application in 30 days prior, you can vote at Cobo Hall. And the way it works is that everybody gets broken up and divided up by district, and so you vote with your district. The process it's kind of a messed up process, the way they kind of allocate delegates, but anyone can participate. And there aren't that many people who usually show up to these things. I think the best attended convention was the one this year. There were about 4,200 or 4,400 people there, and I think that was an all-time record, at least for the last 20, 30 years, something like that. So, I mean, normally in a primary you have over 1 million people vote. In this case, you have 5,000 people deciding for everyone who the nominee is going to be. And so you have a lot of kind of backdoor, smoke-filled room party politics that folks within the Young Dems and many others have really been trying to fight back against. And we saw that a lot in the 2016 elections with the race between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. And I think you'll probably see even more of that in the race that's coming up in 2018 in that Democratic contest.
So is there a political strategy known of, when we just got a couple of minutes here, and just to get this in, is there, and we'll talk about that event November 14th real quick, but is there a political strategy for the one side or the other to have many people there, but maybe by paying them in, bussing them in, so to speak, like what's done with rallies and other things, in order to kind of artificially swing the vote one way or the other?
Yeah, I mean, that happens routinely. I don't know if it's done in a legal way, but often what happens is people are paid money to go to these things. They're paid $75 or $100 for the day, and you have some organizations that will pay 1,000 people or 1,500 people to come out and vote. That's 2,000 people. That hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you have to coordinate all of it and make sure folks remember to come out. I mean, that's a major effort, and it's a lot of resources that are spent on this. Now, it varies year to year, so we'll see what happens this year. But
point is, let's get some people to come out and vote for Dana, because we're probably going to be up against some stuff. Can you tell us about the November 14th event, and then we got to get going here to a break.
Yeah. So November 14th, we're having a gubernatorial meet and greet. We've got Gretchen Whitmer, we've got Abdul El-Sayed, Sharif Anadar, Bill Cobbs, and Evan Space. Evan Space is the only Republican that we've been able to find so far that supports legalization. But all those candidates will be at Sidetrack Bar and Grill.
We're still waiting to hear. We're still waiting to hear from Shooty, right?
We sent Shooty a message. We sent, I think we sent pretty much everyone a message inviting them. Sent Colbeck a message, but they didn't get back to us. So Shooty's person responded, and then I followed up with him, and I didn't hear anything. So I wouldn't expect him to come, but it should be a great event, and we'll be able to. It's specifically intended as an opportunity for these candidates to speak to the issues of the cannabis community directly, because oftentimes, they're in a forum, and it's a 2-hour forum, and they'll get one question on a cannabis issue, and usually it's legalization. Now, all these candidates support legalization, but very few of them have come out against what's happening with this threat of the dispensary shutdown on December 15th.
Right.
They're not talking about, they're only talking about one issue, which is a really important issue, legalization in 2018, but there are a lot of other issues that are really important, and it could really help draw some attention to the fights that are ongoing.
Right, I want to hear
like
the details.
Legislature and the problems with civil asset forfeiture and many other issues that folks are dealing with. So.
So one more time before we have to cut you short here. I hate to even do it, but I just want everybody to know exactly where to go, when to be there. So it's the 14th. Just give them a quick rundown where to go, where to be, and also how to maybe sign up for it again, just really quick.
Yeah, so November 14th, it starts at 6:30 at Sidetracks Bar and Grill in Ypsilanti.
Depot
You
Town.
can go on Facebook and get tickets on the MILegalize Facebook page. That's 6:30 on November 14th. It's going to be a great program. We'll hear from the major candidates in the gubernatorial race who support legalization.
Oh, yeah. MILegalize.com.
Everyone should come out. And if you want to join the Democratic Party for free, you can go to reformmydems.com and you can sign up for free.
Yep, please do, and then show up at the convention. Let's get Dana in there at the very least. That will help us out a lot with the implementation of these new laws. Sam, thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate you calling in, especially kind of on short notice, and we will have you back on and get some updates in the near future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a good one. So some really interesting stuff there from Sam, from the Young Democrats, a cool group, and it would be good for everybody to be able to get out there on the 14th. I'm sure it's going to be one of our call to actions anyway at the end of our show, telling you again how to get there. So,
Sam works with us, and we mentioned it at MILegalize as well as the Young Democrats thing,
absolutely.
and he's kind of combining those efforts with that event and bringing the gubernatorial race with the issue. And that's really cool. That's something people should take some interest in and go check out. It's a unique scenario. And in a lot of our minds, those of us who kind of follow the politics side of it, this issue is at the root of a lot of problems and are a lot of things that could be looked at and solved in other systems and other issues. Just how it gets handled and how it broke down and how it doesn't make sense now what it is and the kind of domino effect it could have when we start looking at this and then as a reform kind of a thing and how it really had a positive effect and we kind of apply logic to stuff. Which doesn't get often done in decision-making process in government. Yeah,
it's been an interesting and surprising road in many ways. And after the break, we're going to have Rick here. It is 5:04, so you know that it's that time for news from Rick. So we're going to
fudge through the news with Rick. He was just telling me he doesn't his ability to put the news together has been compromised, so we have to kind of fudge through that. But we will see what we can do with him when we come back.
So the news from Rick
not to get too excited.
There's no news. From Rick.
Yeah,
no, there is going to be
some
news from Rick.
something.
And we're excited to have it for you. He did get, we lost him on the phone call when we were talking to Sam. But it was a well worth it, good conversation there. And for now, we're going to take a small break.
It was well worth losing him, is that what you're saying?
No, it was worth losing Rick. I mean, it sucks to lose Rick, but it was worth it because we had a good conversation. And I want to let the listeners know, interesting behind-the-scenes note, is I completely ran away from the microphone during that entire... Well, not the entire, but most of the last phone call, which is pretty funny, right? So we decided that we needed more zigzags, and there wasn't any here. So,
and now there are.
Now there are. There's a gas station not far down the road, and I thought I was in better shape than I was. So you may have noticed my microphone was muted for just a few minutes as I caught my breath. Was able to catch back up on what I did catch in Sam's conversation. I am now much smarter. So there you go.
He's a good guy. Works hard. He's trying to affect.
It's good to have people like that. And when you say young Democrats, I mean, how old are we talking here?
Well,
what qualifies you as a young Democrat?
I don't know the exact parameters.
I'm just
honest with you, but it's a caucus. There's also a cannabis caucus of the Democratic Party.
Nice.
Young Democrats. There's these various things that are of kind of more specialty issues.
Nice.
And so
there's really no qualifications. You could just kind of be part of it if you're interested in their.
I think so. I don't really know to what age you're not considered young anymore. I mean, I'm 50. I'd like to consider myself, a young 50. For example.
I'm just saying for any listeners that may be kind of confused because if the name were to throw you off and you to think that it's not a party, you should even check out. I mean, I don't think what I'm trying to say is I don't really think it has to do much with age, more about siding with what they're going after, especially legalization in 2018.
Yeah,
just join up.
They're an infusion of new blood, and they see that they need to like really bring more consistent leadership to the Democratic Party and identification, and be around to take part in taking advantage of these opportunities to lead when they present themselves, and coming through for the people they represent. And Democratic Party's done some good stuff, but has largely misfired by their own mission over the last few years, and hasn't fared as well as they probably should have. So they like to bring in an infusion of new perspective and energy, and that's what it needs. So that's what they kind of represent.
Okay. Well, that brings a little bit more light onto it. I mean, for me personally, and this is obviously, everything I say has nothing to do with our other judges' opinions on the show. But me personally, I think every single political party is pretty stupid. Only because I don't research it enough and know absolutely nothing about it. But in my opinion, everybody's usually just pissed off about money, and it usually depends on which side of the ladder you fall on. Do you make enough money to want these tax codes?
It's broken down to the point where you don't even worry about almost the Constitution anymore. There's no longer this foundation to stand on. Like used to be, everybody agrees, okay, we have this basic set of rights, and this is how far we can go, and everybody has their freedom, and you can rely on this, and then you can argue about details, and should we tax, should we not tax, where should we put the money if we do, how much, what these things that conservatives versus liberal.
Yeah, but people only give a shit about that once somebody's already won. When they're electing somebody, they only care about money.
Well, now they'll switch a position, at a drop of a hat in order to gain more power and control and get to the money or whatever the goal is. And those are the things that are more important than actually following through with principle and ethics and being logical and that kind of stuff. So we no longer even care about our basic set of rights. We're willing to trample on those in order to get to the position.
Yeah, and I mean, in some cases for us, I guess it's worked out because when the majority of politicians come to find that most of our population wants to legalize cannabis, or like the majority voted for at least the medical legalization in Michigan. At first, in 2008, it was over 63%, and it's been on the rise since then. I mean, once politicians see that, then you see them start changing sides, jumping fence, and being on the side of the positive cannabis reform instead of just shutting it all down.
Well, then they say, yeah, we're for this, but then you have to really pay close attention, because how are they for it, and who are they setting up with the ability to be the ones who control the new markets that are being created? And we enter a whole nother level of crap. Yes, we are going to go forward with it, but then how?
Well, in the end, nobody really gives a shit when they're actually electing the politician, in my opinion. Most people are pretending that they give a shit about all the small things that come along with this politician, but in the end, everybody's going to try to save their money.
One of the things that makes them a politician.
Exactly. So, I mean, to me, the whole premise is you're decided on which side of the fence you're on, usually by your income. You know what I mean?
All right, my head is ready to calm down. You know what I mean?
Rick is here, so I just wanted to announce him. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the greatest, Rick Thompson.
He's back. He needed another introduction, yes, because he's so special that he needed to be introduced a couple of times, and maybe even one more time before the end of the show.
Some people call him Rick Stump. He's here.
Some people call him Stump. Oh no, don't do that.
Rick's Stump segment.
And now for Rick's Stump, stay tuned.
And sometimes says some vastly more profound things than Rick himself.
All right, take the floor, man. Rick's news at 5.
Rick, can you remember anything that happened in the news? I know that your normal ability to put together this segment has been compromised, and we can't really do it. But let's try to fudge through this as much as possible.
Well, of course, we'll fudge through it as soon as possible. But I think one of the things that we need to talk about in the news is the emergence of more pro-marijuana candidates for public office. Recently, Jamie Lowell and the Cabbage Cafe has been telling you about candidate for Attorney General Dana Nessel. It's a very serious candidate for the Attorney General's position in the state of Michigan. She shares a party with another woman who's a very serious candidate, this one for the governor of the state of Michigan, that's Gretchen Whitmer. and both of them have come out strongly in favor of legalization or an expanded medical marijuana program. Look at local level officials as well, and the opportunity for people to vote in Detroit on November 7th. We've got the opportunity for someone to vote for a pro-cannabis candidate in the city of Flint. We have a write-in candidacy for George Cushenberry on the Detroit ballot for District 2 because he was unfairly kept off the ballot through a bunch of craziness we should have Richard Clement talk about one day.
Yeah, the only guy who's really made sense on the issue of cannabis for us in the city gets kind of excluded a little bit, probably for other reasons too, but that's unfortunate for us.
Well, and the fact is, when you're going to allow someone to be on the ballot who, if he wins, is not legally allowed to take that office is ridiculous. So 3 men ran, 2 men got put on the ballot, and unfortunately, one of those 2 shouldn't have been. But I think when we also look at the developments with licensing and regulatory affairs and the rollout of the MMFLA, licensing and regulatory affairs has issued, I think, 4 or 5 different press release style advisories in the month of October alone. It's possible we're going to get another one later this week too on caregivers. The way that program is developing and the speed with which rules and regulations are being produced right now by Lara without the licensing board, without any administrative rules committee, it's coming fast and furious. Justin has some information on this too. When his segment comes up, he'll be able to share some insights in that also. He's very well connected, very well respected, and it'll be interesting to hear him speak. I will say that last night at the Thetford Township meeting, Justin Danaskis gave a presentation. In it, Justin said that he believed that in 2 weeks we would have applications, and in 2 weeks we would have rules for some of the MMFLA. So Mr. Danaskis is a Lansing lobbyist. He's very well connected, so we could certainly expect those words to ring true. He doesn't say it if he doesn't believe it. So that would make rules available in the beginning of November.
Okay, and they were shooting for one of the time frames we had heard earlier on was by mid-November. So that's a good sign, and they're working diligently on it. And we've said this in here a few times. They don't have a recommendation panel because they can't put it together yet because it stupidly calls for licensing of the industry professionals before they can be considered an industry professional who are part of the composition of the recommendation panel. So they have to wait until into the process. So they're using their emergency powers ability right now and taking it upon themselves. But by and large, there's some controversy over the financial fitness numbers and things like that. But by and large, they've been getting some good reviews on how they've been handling this.
I've been very, very cautiously praising the licensing and regulatory affairs for their handling of this. I am still overly suspicious of the process by which they're arriving at these rules, since licensing and regulatory affairs is listening to somebody. Somebody is talking to these people. Certainly, we've heard at the MICBD conferences, Jamie and I have heard Director Edgerton say that they've spoken to experts. They've spoken to people. They've been taking input. Now, whether that input comes from a Lansing
it's not funny,
legal firm or whether it comes from some kind of special interest group, we just don't know.
That's interesting.
Yeah. The evolution.
I'm sorry. Let me ask you, Rick. I mean, we have no real way of knowing, but I'd like to think, and I've said this. I think I said this to Larry Gabriel a few days ago. I'd like to think that the way that the board has been listening and has been proactive in trying to learn about things in order to meet their obligations and getting this process implemented, that they might hear the feedback that was by and large negative from the numbers they put out there for the financial fitness amounts. That there may be some modification. Do you hold out some hope that they might look at that and maybe make some adjustments?
Save us,
I
Rick.
do.
You're our only hope.
One of the things that brings me that encouragement level is Mr. Damascus yesterday referring to them as fungible or as a work in progress. Justin's had conversations with some of the principals involved in the decision-making process at Licensing and Regulatory Affairs and at the Bureau of Medical Marijuana Regulation. So he's got a line on stuff that you and I can't see at this point, and I'll take him at his word.
Yep, I would agree. He's a credible source of information. If he's just going to say it, he feels pretty comfortable in it. It's reliable.
And he certainly didn't need to pull that sword out to win any victories in Thetford Township. So it's not as if he was trying to stretch the truth in order to make something happen. He already had a complete command of the room. Everyone trusted his knowledge and his instincts. He did a very good job representing for his client there. Derek, you were going to say something?
Maybe.
Okay.
Short-term memory loss.
Derek was going to say, I like weed. But the other thing to talk about, too, is the success of the public relations end of the MMFLA's rollout. Licensing and Regulatory Affairs has had barn burner license committee hearings. They've had to expand their auditorium space a couple times to accommodate people. They had 750 people apply to be on the work groups, of which they had 5 different committees, about 17 to 20 apiece. So a lot of people didn't get on just because a lot of people couldn't. There was not enough space. But then also recently we heard that there were over 1,500 people who have already signed up through the state's program to learn about the metric system. The metric is the new seed-to-sale tracking program, as well as during those sessions they'll learn about the Acela program, which is a way to input applications and information into the state's database. It's already used by other licensing required industries, so they're trying to more normalize the way that they take that input. So when you look at the way the state of Michigan has responded to the opportunities given to them to participate in this process, they have stood up like fucking champions. Our people are chomping at the bit to get involved in the formation of this and in the execution of it. So
I particularly
this is a real step forward.
I particularly like the fact that the one in Oakland County, the seminars that you mentioned, was moved because of the size, because of the response from Oakland University, from Oakland Community College campus to a place in Novi, which is about, a few minutes closer to my house now. Very rarely is there a change that benefits me.
Well, there you go.
And this one did, so I even like them even just a little bit more now.
Well, it's a bigger thing than being close to your house. I mean, needing a giant facility for that many people that are so interested. I mean, is there more topics being discussed than just that one? Or
no, they've got overwhelming response. There's like 5 of these all over the state, and
it's insane.
They're all full.
Well, that's exactly obviously the power that the steam that we need behind the engine here. I mean, just the more people that are knowing and involved. There's a lot of people that care about this, people that aren't consumers of cannabis on a regular basis, who are just overall concerned for different reasons or interested for other reasons. And I think
here's something. Go ahead, Derek.
No, go ahead, Rick.
I'll go ahead.
I was just going to say
no, Jimmy. No.
The programs themselves, I mean, they do appeal to more than just cannabis consumers, because this is the system that anybody that's going to do retail or that's going to do cultivation or that's going to do processing has to have access to. So you're talking about the scientists will need to be able to input information into the database when they're doing their processing. Master gardeners will be able to do this. And a lot of these people at some of these professions may not have any experience with cannabis whatsoever. So, I mean, and the other thing is anybody that wants to work in a dispensary wants to learn how to use the system so that when they get their job at one, provisioning center, dispensary, however you want to terminology it, they'll be prepared to jump right in and contribute on day one. It will be a selling point for people on their applications if they've been trained this way. So, man, I mean, they are really, Licensing and Regulatory Affairs has really been successful in recruiting for this particular thing.
Yeah, I like this momentum. I hope that the opportunities are wide and far spread, and they do come down on some of the numbers for the financial fitness to increase participation and
Yeah.
really get this thing thriving.
They could more accurately define what they want for capitalization, Jamie. You and I both know that a lot of what a business has is in the brick and mortar, or it's in the equipment they have. They don't necessarily have it in the bank account. So they could define that liquidity in a different way that would make it easier to comply with that. Wouldn't you agree?
Right. They could say it doesn't all have to be liquid, but you have to solidly have these assets or something like that. But that's probably not likely, but I think a modification of these numbers are.
I know that Mr. Damascus mentioned that he had talked to Sandra Licensing and Regulatory Affairs Director
Shelley Edgerton.
And she specifically used the example. He cited this yesterday. She said, if you have a processor that has $200,000 worth of lab equipment in their basement, she said, that's the assets we're looking for. That would qualify. So by that definition, there's an awful lot of people there that may not think they qualify that might actually do qualify.
Well, that's different than being liquid, I guess, unless owning outright would, under that definition, would qualify. But that's news to be able to say you can show your assets as part of that financial fitness numbers. I think would change some things for some people.
Well, Director Brisboe specifically avoided using the term liquid assets. I mean, it's asset allocation, it's available assets. There's all kinds of terminology for it to imply a mixture of cash on hand plus also, saleable capital materials. So,
I wonder how they do the history of the origination of the original purchase money. So, in other words, when we're hearing about the extensive background check to make sure that the money's seasoned and appropriately in the bank for 2 years or whatever the qualifications are. If you have equipment, do they extrapolate back to the credible source of funding that was used to purchase it? I don't know.
That's an intriguing question.
That's very interesting.
I imagine if you had a bunch of cashola right now and you wanted to be able to qualify for that, you could just purchase some equipment with that cash. And then what you're declaring on your application form is a bunch of equipment. If they're not tracking the origin, that would be a great way to take some gains that you may have received through the current market that is not normally traceable and turn it into something that is traceable.
Clean the money.
We'll have to look at the application and find out. I'm sure they're not going to make it that easy.
But they
I'm
might.
sure they're smarter than we are.
I mean, it would be very hard to track the liquid assets because a lot of, I'm sure, people doing this stuff had those assets before any of this. You know what I mean? Or at least some of it. So, like, how would you go about tracking that? Or no, like a lot. And Jamie, your point's very interesting because who knows? I guess like on a more like obvious statement, who knows that it's not like illegal money that was used to like start off all these liquid assets. So is that what you're saying? Making sure that money is clean before it's going in. I like wondering that they would approve that. That would be the difference probably for 50% of the people.
Yeah, there'll be some kind of parameters there that will be presented. Sounds like sooner than later, like within the next couple of weeks, perhaps, and we'll know like what's expected on these applications, and that'll be our insight into.
Well, there's only one way to find out.
This means.
Listen to Jazz Cabbage Cafe every Tuesday at 4 p.m. to hear Rick's news at 5 p.m.
Or just call Rick. Do you have his number handy?
Yeah. Everybody, call Rick. No, I don't have his number handy, actually.
Right.
Oh, I do have his number handy.
Enough of those robocalls already.
248-914. Do you want me to say it? No,
yeah, I doubt he gets a flood of calls, even if you put his number.
We have 4 million listeners right now.
Yeah.
Sure. One of them...
100,000 will definitely call him immediately.
One of them is my right person. One of them is a perfect match for me. What do you know?
There you go. See, you should have been giving away +1s to your convention 2 weeks ago.
He did.
Well, he gave me one, but that doesn't count. I'm a married man, Rick.
Yep. Here's what I'll say. We're
Also
a little
didn't
worried
show
about the state of Michigan and
in
the way that they're passing MMFLA laws. I'm trying to bring us back to cannabis on this. And the fact is, I'm encouraged by hearing Director Brisboe say things like, we look at a lot of different state laws, we looked at a lot of different state programs. It's difficult for the forces we think are trying to manipulate advantage into this lawmaking process. It's difficult for them to do that if what we're doing is following established examples from other states, because that there wouldn't be any opportunity there. So if we're successfully copying successful aspects of programs, maybe we get a little bit better on FLA than we expect.
Maybe that has been the traditional way they look at other states' programs. Usually they cherry pick the most ridiculous, restrictive parts of them and think that it's a good idea over here. But these guys have been these people, as we've been saying in the department, have been taking their job seriously and seemingly being reasonable with it. So I mentioned that to Shelley Edgerton after a business conference a week and a half ago or so, the one right before the MICBD conference in Ann Arbor. And she said it's a new day. And I don't doubt that she and Andrew Bisbo and the others in the department are taking their job seriously. They their actions are speaking louder than words really right now.
Well, if you take a look at who ran licensing and regulatory affairs prior to Shelley Edgerton, I think we're talking about Steve Arwood. Steve Arwood is the guy who rejected the recommendation of the panel of mostly doctors who said autism should be added to the list of medical conditions in the Michigan medical marijuana program. He said not only no, he also said this shouldn't be our job, even though the legislature told us it was our job when they gave us this, or the people with the MMMA. So she's certainly a far cry better than he was. And Director Brisboe, I don't know his history, but he is incredibly professional.
Yeah. Just being functional makes them better. I mean, just actually taking it seriously and doing something that makes sense makes them better.
Yeah.
And I think maybe people listening to Jazz Cabbage don't have the sense of history that you and I have, Jamie. But back when the program first started, it was just an afterthought add-on to the Department of Community Health. And those people, it was a clown circus, wasn't it, Jamie, the first few years? And we had 6 months delays getting cards out. They couldn't get the reports done properly. They would publish a statement and then retract it immediately because it wasn't well thought out. And they were never staffed properly either. You recall that, don't you?
I do. There's a couple of people who, within that department, who kind of felt as though they should have been a little bit more proactive in educating people on the new program and how to go about it and help walk people through this new law. Instead, there was almost resistance and like a strategy to be difficult, practically. And it was a horrible rollout.
It couldn't help but to feel that way. It was difficult. Like almost 50% of the people you talk to are telling you that they either got denied or that, and even still now it's a little bit difficult. But you can tell, like Rick said, the big changes. Before, I used to picture like two guys in this stuffy room with all these applications who have a specific job. You got to get through 10,000 applications a day. So 4 o'clock rolls around, these guys just deny the last 200 people so they can go home. It's like, who gives a shit? Put them in the deny pile and make your way home. I've gotten denied before and they said you didn't have your name on your application. It's like, I know I put my damn name on the application now. Some people get denied for legitimate reasons, but sometimes when you're denied and you look at that thing, it looks like everything was right. You don't see that much. And the big difference to me is the cost. I mean, it used to be $200 for the doctor and $100 per year, and now it's like, $100 for the doctor on average, I would say, and $85 for the state for 2 years, right? I mean, that's pretty insane. It's a big difference in cost. So all around, they've done a better job for me. I like to save money, first of all, and the 2-year difference makes it easier because renewing every year is just something that's it's too much of a challenge, especially when you're dealing with a group of people that wasn't getting things done like they should have been, and having to deal with them once a year was like, oh my God, it's just a headache. It's not worth it. And for a patient that's dealing with pain or something like that and going to doctor's appointments all the time, it's like they don't have time to deal with that anyway. So the way it is now with the 2 years, it's a little bit nicer. But still, full legalization would be the way to go, so people don't have to deal with any bullshit, any paperwork, or any state license. I don't think
there might be advantages to remaining in the medical program, not paying taxes, stuff like that. Yeah, perhaps. But
pediatric patients, employment situations too. Yeah. Some employers will look at you better if you're a medical patient than if you're just a rec user. So as we see the system evolve, there will still be a role for medical to play.
Caregivers will be targeted, though. None of the immediate plans specifically hurt the caregiver system and allows it to run on, although it takes away a large source of income for many caregivers, of course, but not being able to participate in any kind of the commercial system without transitioning into a large garden, via the MMFLA. But they'll continue to get targeted, and I just kind of hope that at some point there's some banding together and some resistance on that. They haven't been well represented the last few years, and the MMFLA doesn't do too much to help them out either.
Well, the problem is that go ahead, Rick.
I'm just going to say the MMFLA, was always intended to be a business regulatory scheme, but you can't walk into that game with your eyes closed and not realize what the current business market is. Jamie and I have been two of the biggest, people pointing to the fact that the current medical marijuana system in Michigan works just fucking fine. The system of receiving overages from caregivers and dispersing them to other patients, there's not really a problem with that. And if there's any isolated incidents about small things about people without cards or things like that, those are a small percentage of incidents. We really didn't need this redo.
I think that we should. And we tried to do this with some other media groups and things like that, but we should pick away at an historical perspective of things within this show on a regular basis and go over what it was like when things passed, when we were just getting up and running, and Bob Redden gets raided, and we move into the beginning of dispensaries and how that was playing out. And that leads into our first attempt at getting, statewide recognition for commercial enterprises. And we used the model that played out via the caregiver system. And that changed over time, of course, and we ended up with what we got. But that story of how we got that stuff started, what it looked like then, what the reasons were, could be interesting for a lot of people just kind of coming into this who don't really understand the foundation of what brings us here.
And what really is a cyclical thing too, Jamie, is that it was, first of all, acceptance on a local level that was driving some of the commerce. Ferndale had passed laws allowing, the dispensary that was eventually raided with the agros, other places like Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor had already had robust discussions about this and were ongoing with discussions. And to a certain degree, some of those raids in the early on, not only were they raids against dispensaries, but they were raids against cities who were trying to have liberal cannabis laws. And in Oakland County, even reached into other counties. You know this. They raided Dryden. They raided.
We had Paul Talinda here. Or not here, but on the show a couple of weeks ago, of course, representing one of the families associated with the Ferndale raids, the Agros. There's a lot of tragedy in there. 7 years later, they end up getting their cases dismissed, but to call that a victory, I mean, certainly it is. But what they had to go through to get there, and that's something we want to have an ongoing discussion about as well.
Yeah, I think this historical perspective is great. I think we'll have to dress up like George Washington a little bit. That'd be kind of fun. The powdered wig has always been one of my things.
You want to go back that far? Go back to 5,000 years ago and they use some like Chinese shaman,
No, but I also wrote about that for High Times too. So when we're ready to talk about that, we can talk about that educatedly.
Or we call in peanut butter and talk about the holy oil of anointment.
Oh, that's a fun one. We can always bring peanut butter on in. Yep.
Yeah, talk about go back to biblical shit.
I love listening to Gersh. Has done some seriously cool shit in terms of helping people out in this whole movement, and
he's always been one of the most fun people to interview,
and gone out of his way to learn shit. Like I early on learned about some of the deeper components of this discussion, from Gersh and his interest and his passion for it. So that's a good idea.
Please finish.
No, I'm just saying that's a good idea to get Gersh on. That fits into our historical perspective as well. He was certainly right there already doing stuff before this all stuff got up and rolling, and he was right there
So you're talking
in
about
the
Gersh
beginning.
Avery, a.k.a. peanut butter. He
talking about
got
peanut butter.
famous for his topical
Peanut
oils.
butter oil, the first one to bring the topical, the non-high way of, aside from the CBD approach, but a way to use cannabis medicinally that turned a lot of people on to the seriousness of how this gets applied in a lot of cases, and that was a really good part of the initial discussion. And he was the one showing up on TV shows and getting interviewed and things like that early on. And
my uncle, who was like pretty against cannabis, asked to use some of the topical oil, of course, because he had a triple bypass and he had this big scar on his chest. He used the topical oil and loved it every day. I never told him it was cannabis. The guy used it every single day and loved it. It's one of the best things he used for his healing process.
And we are not talking about the uncle who was a rock and roll star.
No, we're not talking about Derek St. Holmes.
So here's my thing, though, is that when we talk about Gersh and Renee Emery Wolf and Rick Simpson, we talk about people who have knowledge, but who don't, maybe fit the mold of what other people would think of as an intelligent person or a knowledgeable individual. Renee Emery Wolf, from her wheelchair, would yell at us, "Anandamide, brother, anandamide." And, as we get further and further into the cannabis chemistry, anandamide is a bodily chemical that's significantly affected by THC, and we are only beginning to understand its effects. So you got some people out there that are huge sources of info, but if they're not wearing a three-piece suit and have $200 shoes, a lot of people don't give them the time of day. And that's really one of the things we've struggled with as a community. Some of our greatest heroes don't look heroic,
And people looking for excuses. I remember having a Compassion Club meeting in Birmingham when I used to be part of the Birmingham Compassion Club with Chad, and one of the speakers showed up late or something like that. And I remember hearing somebody talking, like making the assessment that obviously, this person showed up late because they were getting stoned or something. And I think it was one of the lawyers who may not even use cannabis or something, but we had to deal with like just weird stuff like that, like any little thing out of line. So of course somebody who's not perfectly presented or might have some funky clothing on or let their hair go a little bit long, no matter what the content of what they're saying, that they have to get through the weird judgment of that during the transition of people actually being open to hearing this information.
We were abruptly introducing this to a lot of people's lives in a way that they didn't actually ask for. I mean, the 2008 ballot initiative, with all the hoopla surrounding it and with all of the press coverage and everything, a lot of people woke up, on November 5th and said, "We did what?" So when we talked to people in those initial stages in 09 and 10, they were still clouded by all of this, public relations stuff from the drug war. They still believed, cannabis made you insane or made black men rape white women. They still believed the Harry Anslinger lies in a lot of instances. And some of the people who initially came out to talk about the medicinal use of cannabis really got some scorn because people thought they were just making excuses for a recreational use. And those are some brave suckers. Alyssa Irwin strikes my mind, too,
Yeah, but then we had some, really presentable individuals that had a really good name in the community, like Chuck Ream. Guys that were in the beginning that, they were outspoken, they dressed well, and they, did have that heroic persona.
Kindergarten
Jamie
teacher,
Lowell,
kindergarten
Rick
teacher,
Thompson.
Sile Township board member for many years.
Yeah.
Chuck was one of those guys.
Well, and a lot of people knew him because
Matt Abel, you're right.
Matt
Rick
Abel.
Thompson, for example.
Yeah. Matt Abel is one of those guys that does stand out. He marketed himself well before 2008. He was one of the only guys that I ever heard of as a pot attorney in the state before all this stuff started happening. So I'm sure there was a million other guys, and you guys probably know all their names. But like as somebody who wasn't as deeply involved, he was the only name I knew. So it's a pretty big deal. And like when me and Jamie used to do a show, we did Third Coast TV, which is a representation of a dispensary that was the first dispensary in Michigan that Jamie's associated with. Yep. But anyway, so Third Coast Compassion Center had a show, Third Coast TV. It's still on YouTube. And we used to interview everybody. And this started in 2009.
Yeah.
Right? And we interviewed a lot of people right out of the front gates. And as somebody new to all this, I didn't even realize what the hell we were doing. And it was actually for a school project at Specs Howard. That's when I first met Chuck Ream. He was my very first interview in this whole thing. and kind of set the bar high for everybody else. We did a couple, of course, we interviewed the owner of Sidetracks at the time, the owner of the dispensary with you, Daryl. He spoke, and there's just a lot of outspoken people that I met at the time.
The guys who own the restaurant on the
Charmy.
corner,
Yeah.
and how happy they were with all the new business coming in, and how
Abe's
respectful
Coney
everybody
Island.
is. Yep.
Abe's Coney Island. It's already a big landmark place in Ypsilanti, but I was seeing, the growth around, the safety of the environment within Third Coast, and it was just a good time, and it made everything better. And for me, like every time I walk into a dispensary, I get this giant smile on my face. But that was it. That was the first time. That was it. And I got to meet all these people. And one of the big thoughts that I had at the time was 90% of them were sloppy, but this 10% of these people that were outspoken and doing the job, man, those people right there, those heroes have made one hell of a difference. And same with the people. And I think that Renee, she did look like a hero. She was one of my one of my favorite people I've ever interviewed.
Are quite awesome, and
cool.
that should be part of a recount of history. And Gersh worked with her a bit. We have him here. He can go over some of that stuff. And there's our others.
Our countless videos with Renee. We can play audio bits from her, and almost every video we ever made, she was involved.
So
in.
I think this is a good idea, man.
Yeah.
We a segment every week on building up kind of like how we get here and some really interesting points of the history along the way.
Rick, I got old interviews with you, right?
I was about ready to say
I'm
we
sure
don't.
I remember coming down to Third Coast, my very first time coming to Third Coast. Kirk Reed, Captain Kirk, had a paint roller in his hand as he was rolling some paint down the back hallway. I sat at a desk with, who's that guy? Not Daryl, but the other guy from there, Jamie?
Anthony Freed?
Fell on favor. Yeah, Freed. Freed had his desk.
We'll
and
get
he
Freed
had a
in
giant
here, too.
camera pointing directly at his desk. So it was very much part of it. That's the reason I came to Third Coast was the video project initially.
Yeah, Anthony Freed, one of the original rock stars.
It really helped.
We also went into your office at Big Daddy's, which is a pioneering organization, and we did a good interview there. That was like Derek and some of his buddies were wrapping up their program at Spec Howard's, and they showed up with some cool equipment and everything, and you did all right.
Yeah, I mean, it was Jamie gave me the opportunity right off the rip. I had nothing coming in at the time, and we had these Specs Howard projects, and we actually blew their mind by coming through with some purpose. We actually wanted cannabis reform. We were interviewing the right people. Luckily, Jamie, kind of guided my way through it. Got to meet some great names like Rick, and I mean, Captain Kirk. Just so everybody knows, he just won. He just won a pretty big award at the Cannabis Cup, right? He just won Best Edible.
He's won like 8 or 9 of them or something like that around the country, and he's a good guy. He learned how to do it originally for his own condition, and then perfected his craft, and people will like his products.
And specifically, they helped one of my friends because it's a clear liquid. I was able to sneak in a popsicle to him. What were you saying, Rick?
I was going to say there's another example of another guy who we consider a hero in our community, but to others who don't know his history may not look heroic. Adam Brook is another one. I mean, when we talk about pre-2008, there was no Rick Thompson, and I don't believe there was any Jamie Lowell, but there was Adam Brook, and there was Matt Abel, and there was Marvin Surowitz and Dr. Whitty, and people like that too. Chuck Ream got the medical in Ann Arbor
Tim
in
Beck.
I think 2002.
Yeah, Tim Beck in Detroit.
Yep. So when we look at it,
That's
that was
crazy.
a small group of people, and the cast of characters at Michigan Normal, and you can't do anything without talking about Christine Landino,
Melanie, Trina.
Melody Carr. Oh my goodness! So
Trina
when we start
Moss.
talking about the people who were real heroes before we even got into this game.
Who's the one guy?
Those
with
are
a cool
some
name?
names you just can't not talk about. In High Times Cannabis Cup had an event, or excuse me, a panel discussion that Adam set up. It was so poorly attended, and I was so sad for that because it was OGs and gangsters, and it had Mike Diesel from Detroit was there, and Ron Case from People's Choice was there. People who were really balling before it was medical.
Hey, wait, a couple of these guys came back out of retirement to help out with this legalization campaign around. They were also inspired by our missing the boat in the 2016 campaign, but generating so much positivity, getting so many signatures regardless, and some of those guys came back out of retirement to help out with this, and they were on that panel too. And people like that will be great candidates to have on the show to help describe some of this history. I'm just really looking forward to doing this. I was kind of doing it with another media group thinking that's kind of getting covered, but there really hasn't been much action there, and we keep on referring to a lot of stuff, and a lot of people are listening to us.
We can play interviews from back then, and it'll be interesting to hear what we were asking for and what we wanted back then, and to see what we've actually come up with, and maybe how our ideals have changed. You know, and you were talking about Adam Brooks, and a lot of our listeners might not know who that is, but you might recognize him when I describe him as the guy who has a really powerful voice at some of the year's previous hash bashes. He's done, like, right?
He's called Mr. Hash Bash. Mr. Hash Bash.
Mr. Hash Bash. So if you've been there, if you've attended at High Noon and heard all the speeches, you of course have heard from our amazing hosts here, but a lot of those guys as well. So maybe if you don't recognize them now, like, research these guys, because going and figuring out what they're talking about, what they're doing, could be a great call to action for everybody else too. And maybe by having them on our show, just kind of builds up that for everybody, because we need to really get our listeners to know who it is to actually listen to, because there's a lot of people out here talking shit, and when it comes to reform, it's scary because some of it is not all in the best intentions.
No, we refer to a lot of stuff with historical context, and not everybody is familiar with all that too. I'm looking forward to kind of recounting some things, and there's a writer out there who wants to kind of put together some of that information too.
Who is it?
It should be preserved. His name is Ken, and his last name is like Burger or something like that.
Well, let's make sure he's not listening.
And but he's a good. He's a good dude.
Socialrevolution.org. So he publishes on the Bloom blog, and then I also reproduce his stories, syndicate them on my publication too.
He's a good guy. He's done a lot of work even with veterans and a lot of other ideas. He's involved in this stuff now, and he's got some good ideas for presenting the history by including a lot of voices and perspective. And some of the people we gather for this could be good candidates for being included in that kind of a project. And we'll get him in here too, talk about what his vision is for that, and see who we can help him out with.
Well, right along that theme, we happen to know the people that are creating the marijuana museum in Hazel Park, Jamie. So when we talk about history, it goes beyond Michigan.
Hey,
and I believe the people at BDTs and Curtis are doing something that will encompass more of a national history, too.
Yeah, the BDT head shops, although they are not specifically one of our sponsors here, that many of those people are also involved with Chong's Choice and putting on this museum that Rick is talking about, and we appreciate them and what they do, and wanting to preserve the history as well, and that'll be a great part of the conversation. And I got an early glimpse of that museum. A lot of really cool stuff. A lot of it is in the form of old media and kind of trinkets and stuff like that, and so it would require kind of getting a background on these things and where they came from and that kind of stuff. And they're kind of working on that now, and it's going to be really interesting for people when they get that open to the public. And I agree.
One of the ways.
Can you consume cannabis at this museum?
No, not right now, but in the future, I'm assuming that will happen. And maybe it has happened, but before it's actually open to the public. But I'm not privy necessarily to discussing that.
Well, one of the things I'll say is that when you start talking about the history in Michigan, it's not just composed of the news articles and the stories, although those are good chronicles of it. It's the actions. And, man, look at some of the people behind that group. You talk about bringing Tommy Chong to Hazel Park and giving him the key to the city. As far as I'm concerned, that's one of the ways where we brought a national cannabis celebrity right to the heart of the problem, Oakland County, and celebrated him for no reason other than the fact that he advocates for the medicinal and the recreational use of cannabis. So
he generated a lot of excitement, man, during that time. They brought him in. That's what inspired it to keep going too. Really, was that great response. I've said it before, but just to point out, since we're talking about this, during the time he was there, and outside of the ceremony in which the key was given, there was a line of people around the block to see him, and it was starting to get late. And he made it clear that he was hanging out until he got to see everybody. And I always just think that's really cool of him to have done that.
And Tommy's not a young man either, so for him to have said something like that is quite a commitment in his physical shape too. I mean, it's not easy talking to that many people, using your voice constantly for a couple, 6 or 7 hours. It's not easy to stay seated that whole time, bending over to take selfies with people. He's so accommodating too. When we've had experiences in the past, autographs, handshakes, sit down, smoke with you. Tommy's a very approachable guy, but you have to bring him here in order for people to be able to meet him. Same thing with Snoop Dogg. I appreciated Vehicle City for bringing Snoop Dogg up from Detroit to Flint a couple of weeks ago, even though there were some concerns about the performance and it was not in the traditional format that we normally see Snoop. It was still cool. We're able to pull off some pretty amazing things in the cannabis industry in Michigan without any authorization from the state at all.
I would agree. The needle has been moved. We keep on wanting it to be a little bit better, and that's reasonable on our side, but there is no question that when we want to go over this and where we started to where we are now, we're heading in the right direction. We might be frustrated a little bit along the way, but we are heading in the right direction.
Well, I know I really like weed a lot. I know you guys do too. What do our listeners have to do this week and every week in order to legalize this shit by 2018? Jamie, because we got 3 minutes left.
There are some people holding on to petition sheets that have signatures on them, thinking that we have until the third week in November, which is actually the end of the 180-day time frame. However, we would like to have all of those things immediately because there may be a turn-in before then, if possible, and it might be more strategic in terms of timing based on the process involved. So if anybody has any signatures, please turn them in as soon as possible. MILegalize.com for some direction on contacts to get that done. And let's get as many in as possible right now. And it's getting exciting because last numbers I were hearing was over 95% complete signature gathering. So
wow,
we gotta be just right there.
Nice. Yeah, so get those signatures.
It will be a historic turn-in for sure. My contribution for what people can do is November 7th is the election date here in Michigan. There are a lot of local races that people don't pay attention to because it's not a gubernatorial nor a presidential year. It's an off year. Learn about your local politics because most of what happens to you, most of what screws with your life is local politics. So find out who your candidates are, ask them the questions about cannabis, go to their websites, drop a question through the contact box, and when you get the answer, share it. Share it through social media, positive or negative, doesn't matter. That person is giving you their stance on an important topic. Everyone in that particular district or voting area should know about it. So that's your mission from me. From Jamie, turn in your damn petitions, you sluggards. And for me, it's learn more about local politics so that you can be ready to vote in an educated way November 7th.
And mine is smoke weed loud and proud. Like, come out of the closet. Don't be scared. Let everybody know this shit's normal and better than drinking.
Yep. It's not bad. You're not a bad person.
You're not a bad... It's okay. It's okay. There's a lot of us.
I'm going to be not a bad person here within seconds of signing off. And American Works is not coming on today, unfortunately. The folks are not coming in. I don't know what happens there, but we miss them because it's really cool when they usually come in before we talk to them a little bit about it, their show. And we're talking about maybe having them come in a few minutes before they start their show and talking to us a little bit about some of the stuff coming up and how it might relate to some of our issues and tying in a little bit. So that will happen in the future, but not today.
Okay, well, Rick, you want to say bye to these people?
Hey, listen, thanks everybody for listening. Jazz Cabbage Cafe. Don't forget, participate locally, think globally.
All right, on that note, we'll see you next week, every Tuesday, 4 to 6 p.m. The Jazz Cabbage Cafe.